Hi, my name is Nick Bilbro. I'm with New River Valley Community Services, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to respond to an opioid overdose emergency. So the first thing we need to talk about is what exactly is an opioid. So a lot of people tend to interchange the term opioid with prescription pain medicine, but it's good to understand that opioid is basically the umbrella terminology, and that encompasses prescription pain medicine, opioids, as well as synthetic opioids such as fentanyl, carfentanil, things like that. Fentanyl was originally used as an end-of-life care opioid, and is still used in hospitals today, but that's not typically what we're talking about. We're talking about made more in an underground lab kind of scenario, and what's kind of scary about fentanyl is it can be in basically any other substance, so even if you think somebody hasn't been using opioids, it's still a possibility, because we have seen marijuana laced with opioids, we've seen heroin laced with fentanyl, we've seen a lot of these different types of substances that have been laced with fentanyl. Another thing to take in consideration is what happens in an overdose and some of these signs. So basically, you have these brain receptors in the brain, and the opioid, when the body consumes too much opioids, it attaches to these receptors. These receptors basically get clogged, and then a person goes into an overdose. That amount of opioids can differ from person to person depending on their past history of usage. Sometimes body size can play a part in as well, but a person will typically have slow, shallow breathing, or sometimes you can hear what's known as a death rattle, which is a very disturbing sound. And then you've also got low heart rate, sometimes no heart rate at all. They will typically have pale, clammy skin, and the biggest thing is they are unconscious, and they are not going to respond to pain stimulus. So most of the time what we recommend is for you to perform some type of pain stimulus to see if they respond. This does not mean beat the crap out of them by any means. Basically what you would do is what's known as a sternal rub. So basically you take your knuckles right here, place it on their sternum, and press and rub it up and down. And typically if somebody is unconscious, they're not going to respond. If they're conscious, they're just not going to be too happy with you. I know as well sometimes I have people say they don't feel comfortable putting their hand right on someone's chest. You can also pinch the earlobe. That's an adequate pain stimulus as well. But those are kind of some of the main signs that happen during an overdose. So some risk factors to keep in consideration. Prior overdose, so if someone has a history of usage of opioids and they've overdosed in the past, they typically are more likely to overdose again. Reduced tolerance, so this can be voluntarily or non. So if you had somebody that went through treatment and then they relapse, unfortunately, the body, as we stop taking those opioids, the sensitivity and tolerance gets lower and lower and lower, and so a person may go back to using what they were using a long time ago, and then that's too much opioids for the body, and they will go into an overdose. And sometimes as well incarceration. So when an incarcerated individual leaves, same scenario, they may start taking the same amount that they were taking previously before they were incarcerated, and then they end up overdosed. Mixing drugs, so uppers, downers, things like that. Obviously they do not cancel each other out, but they can cause a lot of issues there. Using alone as well can be a risk factor. Now we're going to talk about Naloxone or Narcan. Typically you'll hear them kind of used interchangeably. Naloxone is the umbrella terminology for the opioid overdose reversal drug. I'll say Narcan a lot because that's what you'll be receiving. And so Narcan looks like this. And basically it is a nasal spray form of Naloxone. There are other forms such as intramuscular. There is what looks like an EpiPen. It's an auto-injector, and there are other forms, but the Narcan is the most commonly used and most available. So a lot of our police force, EMS, and just the typical layperson will use Narcan as opposed to those other means of administration. So exactly how Naloxone works. So as I mentioned before, you have those brain receptors, the opioids latch onto it. The Naloxone has what's known as a stronger affinity than the opioid to these receptors. So basically they come in and knock off those opioids and kind of latch onto those receptors. Now, depending on how much opioids in the system, it can take multiple dosages of Narcan, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. But understand as well that Narcan's not going to hurt somebody if they're not overdosed, or even if they are. It can only help. So some common questions I have are people ask, well, what if they've had a heart attack? What if they've had a stroke, a seizure, and I give them Narcan? Is it going to make it worse? The answer is no. And from my understanding as well, we haven't really had any recording of allergies either. And I also have had questions if, what if my toddler gets a hold of it? What if my dog gets a hold of it? And it's not going to hurt them either. So even if a conscious person uses Narcan, basically it's just going to give them a runny nose. It's not going to hurt them by any means. And in that same vein, you actually can use it on toddlers and animals. So if your child, let's say you had shoulder surgery back in the day, and you lost one of the OxyContin just in the carpet, no ill intent, but then you have a child or an animal that basically just gets curious and picks it up, you can use Narcan on, again, either a dog, a child. Technically you can use it on a cat, but it's not going to hurt them by any means. So where to obtain the Naloxone or the Narcan? So there is a standing order, and basically what that means is there are certain locations that you can go and receive Narcan. Now in this crazy time right now, we are going to be trying to send out the Narcan so that you won't have to go anywhere to get it. But in the future, so local health departments, Virginia Department of Health, any of their facilities where they have somebody that can prescribe the Narcan, you're able to get it. NRVCS, so New River Valley Community Services, or your local community service board, if you're not from around here, you can go to them, and typically they'll be able to get you Narcan as well. The only thing there is we have a limited amount of people who can actually prescribe the Narcan. The best way to get in contact with us, if you're wanting to go through us, would be either to email me, and I'll kind of give out my information at the end of this, or you can go to nrvcs.org and get some more information there. And then community pharmacies as well. So I will say there's nothing wrong with getting at a community pharmacy, but just understand that not all insurances will cover Narcan. And it's typically about $140 to purchase it. And if you get it through your local health department or through us, you will get it for free. So I recommend that you get it through us or the health department. But basically it's at those community pharmacies. So let's say you're somewhere and you don't have your Narcan on you, so Walmart or Walgreens, somewhere like that, and let's say somebody has overdosed in the parking lot or in the bathroom, you are able to go to that pharmacy and say, hey, I need Narcan, and they should be able to supply it for you. Now, what to do in the actual opioid overdose emergency? So the first thing is we do want to check, one, to make sure the environment's safe for you, but then we want to check for responsiveness. So we talked about that pain stimulus earlier, so that sternal rub, that ear pinch. You can kind of shake them on their shoulders a little bit, similar to what you would do for if somebody had a heart attack and you were just checking for responsiveness there. I will say always be careful. So opioids sometimes can be ingested through the nostrils. So if you see any white powder on their clothes, their nostrils, anything like that, just be careful not to touch it. It could be absorbed through the skin, or you could inhale it, and then we've just got 2 people overdosed, and that's not doing anyone any good. So then you want to call 911. This is probably the most important step, because even if you don't have your Narcan on you, even if you can't, help in any other way, if we can get the EMS there to give them whatever else they need, and even if you have your Narcan, they'll be able to help out with whatever else is going on. Because let's say they did overdose, but then they fell and cracked their head, or they hurt themselves some other ways, we might not be able to help with that, but EMS will. And make sure you give them your location, kind of try and stay calm. And in that same vein as well, if the person is not breathing, you can start giving rescue breaths. Now, I have had some people say, well, what if they had that powder substance around their nose? It's kind of err on the side of caution. If you don't feel comfortable giving the rescue breaths, it's understandable. Just understand after about 3 to 5 minutes of not breathing, there can be permanent brain damage from that lack of oxygen. So then after that, we give the Naloxone, again, or the Narcan. And basically what happens is if you've ever used Flonase or any nose spray like that, you put it up the nostril, kind of tilt their head back. Obviously, they'll be laying on the ground, and we forcefully spray up into the nostril. The reason I say forcefully is if we just kind of do it, very slow, it'll just kind of drain out and it won't get through that blood-brain barrier. So we want to forcefully press it up the nostril. Again, it's just one single spray. It's a single use only. So once you've used it, you're good. And then continue rescue breathing until EMS can arrive. Now, there are some scenarios that can happen. So after the Narcan, in an ideal world, you'd use the Narcan, they'd come out of it, everything would be hunky-dory. Unfortunately, that's not typically the case. So let's go with the first scenario. You give them Narcan and they have not responded within 3 minutes. Typically, Narcan's going to start being effective within about 30 seconds to 90 seconds. So if they haven't responded in that time, most of the time, even a minute and a half, you could go ahead and use that other dose of Narcan that you're receiving. So it comes 2 in a box, but just understand you don't have to take out a stopwatch, you don't have to time and say, okay, has it been 3 minutes, go. But if they haven't responded within that minute and a half to 3 minute window, it's good to just go ahead and give them that other dose of Narcan. It's not going to hurt them. And then again, it may be even after that next 3 minutes they don't respond. And that's where it's, again, so important to have 911 arrive, because they can actually have what's known as a Naloxone drip, and basically that's an IV bag of Naloxone. So there have been cases where we've seen people that need 6, 8, 10 dosages of Narcan before they come out of that overdose because they've ingested so much opioid. Another scenario is use the Narcan and they come out of the overdose. Understand as well, this is not something where they just kind of springboard up. They will slowly kind of come out of it, maybe be a little groggy. They also may be a little angry because you just ruined their high basically, and they're going into immediate withdrawal. Now the withdrawal is not fatal, but they're still not going to feel great. They're going to have kind of flu-like symptoms, just feel very crappy basically. So if they come out of it, the best thing is you want to try and keep them calm to the best of your ability. You want to keep them in that same spot so that EMS can arrive. And another reason is it's possible for them to relapse. So they may come out of it, they may feel, okay, they're like, no, I'm fine. And then a little bit later they relapse because that Narcan hasn't worn off, that half-life after about 90 minutes. So it can kind of wear off in about 90 minutes is what that means. And so after that they could relapse. And again, you could have a continuous cycle with this where you use Narcan again, they come out of it, they relapse. But that's why it's so important to try and keep them calm, keep them in the same spot, because if they run off and they overdose again, they could get injured. The EMS is then going to have a harder time locating them, stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. So that's kind of the basic steps to how to respond to an opioid overdose emergency. If you have any other questions, if you need Narcan, if you want to go more through the formal training once everything kind of settles down, feel free to reach out to me. So my email is nbilbro, Bilbro, at nrvcs.org, or you can visit our Facebook page or our website at nrvcs.org. And hopefully you found this information helpful.